Hello. Hi. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Hi, Cynthia, Todd, Nina. Hi. Hi. You may remember me from the first session. My name is Rachel Leidy, and I'll be leading today's session, which is end user training number 2. So if you've not sat through end user training session number 1, you might want to just schedule yourself for that. You don't have to leave this meeting. It's still good information, but we are going to be starting halfway through the tool, halfway through the application. I'm going to be closing out my training for the rest of the application. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So like I said, in the first session, we would have covered, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. Okay. In the first session, we would have covered start, people, tools, and documents. Now I'm going to be talking about conducting an assessment and how to document that in FutureFeed, reviewing your system security plan, managing a system POA&M, and some deliverables. Okay. So feel free to, let me get through this part of the training, and then at the end I'll open up for questions, and feel free to ask any questions that you may have, for things that we covered in the first part of the training as well. I mean, really ask anything you want, and I'm here to help, okay? So I'm going to get started with assess so that way I don't run out of time. Now, assess, this is where you're going to document assessment results and requirement status in FutureFeed. And it's not a place where any C3PO assessor, they're not going to fill this out at all. It's not for external assessment. Now you can get an external assessment and then take those results and document them into FutureFeed, but a C3PAO assessor is not going to manage this page. I just want to be clear because sometimes people think that's what this area is for. It's for you guys, your company, to document your internal assessment activity and results. So you should really be using this page. Of course you would use it while you're working on implementing the requirements and you get up to that 100% implemented. But then, as you may be aware, there is an annual requirement. That's in the 312 family, CA 312 1 security control assessment. So periodically, whenever you see that word, it means annually. So annually assess security controls in the company. So you should be providing or evaluating all of the controls once, at least once in the year, and you would fill out this section here. And then you definitely would want to probably conduct some sort of internal assessment before you go into any big external assessment with a C3PAO. Okay. So conducting an assessment, let's just jump into it. Here it lists all the controls. If you're going to be assessing maybe a level 1, you'd switch to the level 1 control set up here at the top. And then these are just the level 1 controls. If your company is subscribed to, 853 or 800-171 Rev 3, you would see those listed here and you could toggle between the different frameworks. For an assessment, however you want to approach the controls, there's really no right or wrong way on how you want to approach the controls. Some people just start with 311 and they work themselves work all the way down to the bottom 314 family. When I do assessments though, I do like to do some families together. And you'll learn which families relate over time. I will work on getting an article put together on conducting an assessment. But for example, when I evaluate AC controls, access controls, after I'm done evaluating the AC controls, I then jump down and start working on the IA controls because they're just so closely related, and the same tool like Active Directory is usually, has play in both families. So AC and AI relate. What else relates? System information and integrity as relates pretty closely to the configuration management, and AU, right? Because we're talking about information integrity, which gets into audit logging, and that relates a lot to the AU family. But like I said, there's some articles out there on how to approach assessing 171. There's no right or wrong way though. So you would just want to make sure that you have a result for every control. You could see here, I got a couple, I have 3 marked not NA. I have 2 controls that haven't been assessed at all, or they just don't have results in FutureFeed. 44 not implemented, 61 are compliant. You can filter here, you can search. If you're curious to see the control requirements that are assigned to you as an individual, you would filter here. I only have this 313 control assigned to me, so I should see my name under the interview right there. Okay, so clear that out. But you just want to start on a control. Let's see. I'm going to change environments, actually. I'm going to go into this one. So 318, here's how I would do an assessment, or I do assessments. When you first get access to FutureFeed, you're not gonna, this is going to be all blank. So not only are you going to have to assess the control, but then you're also going to have to, sorry, I got someone waiting in the waiting room. Okay. Hi, Mark. Welcome. So you're gonna have to, not only are you gonna have to assess the control and identify if it's met or not met, but then you're also gonna have to work on identifying, if it is met, how is it implemented, and getting that documented. And then if it's not met, you're gonna have to work on developing out a plan of action and identify what is that implementation plan. What does your company need to do in order to get that control requirement implemented? So there's a little bit more work when you're first setting up FutureFeed and developing out your assess page. But then when you go into that annual assessment, it will be quicker, because what that looks like is you just open up a control, you read this summary notes section here, which will describe how that control is implemented in your company. And then you'll read the different statement areas, which will describe how that requirement's implemented in your company. And then you're just evaluating if what is stated there is still true. If it's not true, then you would update that narrative, okay? So here, to do an assessment, of course, start by reading the requirement, limit unsuccessful logon attempts. But whenever you're doing an assessment, always do it at the objective level. That's why we made FutureFeed have the results at the objective level. Okay, in an assessment, if you fail one objective, you do end up failing the overall control requirement. There's 2 exceptions with that, but in general, just think of, all my objectives need to pass in order for me to pass that control. So we're always work at the objective level when assessing. and implementing. Okay. In the summary notes section is where you would put like a high level description on how that control's being implemented. And then the objectives is you have a place called the statement here. This is where you define how this specific objective is being met. Okay. So after you read the control and the requirement, the very first thing you want to do is figure out who do you need to be talking to at your company to evaluate if this control is implemented or not. So that's this interview section. So expand that. It may be blank. If it's blank, you're going to have to figure out who you need to talk to and then associate them here. Make sure you tag them here. So this one's a technical control, as well as there's some documentation requirements, but typically this whole control is an IT thing. Okay, so you would reach out to the system administrator or the IT department and talk to them, have that discussion. Hey, do you guys have a definition of a documented definition of unsuccessful logon attempts? What's the threshold? Is that set? Is there a limit of unsuccessful logon attempts? And if it is it defined somewhere? Okay. You would be talking to someone at your company and they would say yes or no. If they say yes, then immediately ask for evidence. So if they say, yeah, we have that defined, okay, where is it defined? Tell me where is it defined, and please provide me that document so I can upload it into FutureFeed as evidence. So you'll see here an example of how I typically write up the objective statements. Really, I just end up kind of regurgitating the objective. So the means of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts is defined in the access control policy. So now I would want to make sure that I have a version of that access control policy in FutureFeed under the documents section. If it's not there, just go back, add a new document, fill it out, access control policy, make that entry, and then make sure you get that document from whoever at your company and upload it to here. You can either make it into a live document so you can start working, maintaining, managing that document in FutureFeed directly, or if that document's managed elsewhere, you can just attach it here as your evidence. But you're gonna want to make sure you have this entry in FutureFeed and you have the document either attached or you're managing it here. Okay. So going back to the control, we said it was defined. Then you work on that objective. Where is it defined? Make sure it's clearly spell this out. You want to be very clear in here, not only for assessment purposes, like external assessors, but the more clear you can be, that's only going to help you next year when you have to do an assessment. It cuts out a lot of the guessing if you can just clearly state something in detail. Okay. So when you mark something met, I would only mark something met if you have evidence that it's met. In my consulting days, you know, we would wait. There was a few times where where a client would say, yeah, we have that implemented, and just due to lack of, you know, maybe miscommunication or someone not knowing, they actually didn't have it implemented, so it led to a failure. So always trust, but verify with your evidence, okay? If you're waiting on evidence, like let's say you're speaking to the IT department and they say, yeah, we have that defined. It's in our access control policy. You can go ahead and mark it met, even if you don't have that document yet. But then you could open up a POA&M item if you want, add a POA&M, and then please provide latest version of ACP. Okay, add, get it assigned to the IT department. Okay, now you just created a POA&M. It's been assigned to the IT department, where you can assign it to the system administrator. you know, and now it's clear they have an item tracked that they get. Nobody can forget about that, okay? Because you're going to be managing after you do your assessment, you're going to start working in your system POAM daily, weekly, making sure those items get completed. And so you won't forget about it because you're going to see it on there, okay? So you can mark things met and have a POAM. So that's common. People think, oh, if I have something met, I can't have a POAM. Well, it depends on how you want to do it. If you're still waiting on evidence, you could say it's not met and then have a POAM, or say it's met and have a POAM. It's up to you. Now to close POAMs, you can do it from this area, or you can go into your FutureFeed POAM up here. But to close out a POAM, you would just click it and mark it complete and define, why are you marking it complete? What was done? A access control plan has been received. And I don't know how to spell, so spell check is great. Okay, moving on to the next objective. The defined means of limiting unsuccessful attempts is implemented. So here is a very technical control. These are usually you're going to need to see some screenshots or configuration settings, some policy settings. So again, you're going to want to define that, how that objective is being implemented in your environment. And I like to use this one as an example because you notice here I got 3 different implementation narratives. I have 1, 2, 3. This is really important. I can't tell you how many assessments I went into, and they did have a system security plan documented, and just by a quick glance, it looks like they've addressed all the controls, but then when you get into the assessment, they've failed to identify how that control is implemented for all assets in the environment. They would only focus on the majority of the assets, like the user endpoints, but they didn't think to talk about their on-prem firewall or their database, or maybe their external service provider is using a remote access management tool to remotely manage your CUI assets. Well, that remote access management tool is in place, and they should have a limit of unsuccessful logon attempts set, so that way nobody can just access your environments by brute force, okay? So in this, here I say, the defined means of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts is implemented by Entra ID. There's a conditional access policy that is enforcing the limit of unsuccessful attempts. Entra ID is managed by my external service provider. Call them out. They are responsible for configuring and managing Entra ID. And this is another important thing I like to include. Please see that external service provider's shared responsibility matrix for additional details. Instead of give me 1 second. I have a couple questions. Let me take a look at it. While I do appreciate the input, Nina, it's really hard to, all assessors, they're gonna have assessors that have different approaches. And the definition of a requirement, let's go back to this, the means of attempting, the means of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts is defined. It does not have to be defined here. You could define it here, but it doesn't have to be. Unfortunately, your assessor who told you that was being biased, and that's not accurate. And you can push back on those assessors, if you'd like. But, you know, it's a preference on how you want to document it. She's saying that you have to define it, or I'm sorry, that she heard that you have to define it here. So some people do define things here. The means of limiting unsuccessful attempts is, 15 minutes within, probably 5 attempts, within 15 minutes. Okay, you can do that. You can do that, or you can point to somewhere else where it has defined. And it's up to you on how you want to do it. If you ever go into an assessment and the assessor says, no, it must be defined in the system security plan, highly, highly recommend you escalate that to the assessment lead and then the C3 PAO, because they are introducing very prescriptive and requirements that are not part of the 171. I've been doing this for 15 years. I I've done several assessments. I've sat through several assessments where, um, that's not being enforced. So, but yeah, so there's two ways. There's definitely two ways to define this. You could define it like this, or if your company prefers to have it defined in policy. The thing is, me personally, why I don't like doing this, is because you want one source of truth. So that way you don't have a situation where you have an access control policy that says it's 3 attempts when in 15 minutes and your system security plan says it's 5 attempts in 15 minutes. You just want one source of truth, whether that be your system security plan or your policy. Just the goal is to have one source of truth. But if you do want to define things in your system security plan, that's fine. However, a system security plan it's not written for general audience. And so you may not, like when you get into the training requirements, having those defined in your system security plan may not be helpful, because the training department, they don't want to look at your system security plan. They're just going to have a training policy to follow. So however you want to document it, just try to aim for one source of truth. So that way you don't have, what's it called? Information, different information in 2 different places. One source of truth is the goal. And then if you ever are in assessment and an assessor does state that, oh, it has to be defined in the system security plan, I would escalate that, because I've seen some assessors out there that are going pretty wild on stuff. Oh, but down here, so I'm trying to show you, that do address the implementation. Don't forget about your assessment scope. Okay, you have CUI assets, you have security protection assets, you have CRMA assets, and you have specialized assets. Be sure to address how that objective is implemented on all of the assets. If the implementation is the same, then one statement is fine. But if it's different, then you might want to lay it out like I've done here. So I have some inheritance for my Windows boxes, and then I have an on-prem firewall where that setting of unsuccessful logon attempts, it's not being picked up or enforced by Entra ID. It's a local setting. And so my firewall system administrators actually set that. And then I'm using, in this sample environment, I'm also using an application to store, process, and transmit CUI. So how is that application implementing the requirement? And that is fully inherited in this example. So you would define inheritance, and then for any external service providers or software that is owned and managed by an external company, they should be providing you with a shared responsibility matrix or a customer responsibility matrix that defines how that technology is implementing the requirements. And once you get a hold of that CRM or SRM, you're going to want to make sure you upload it under the documents section under reference documents CRM. So here I have a Prevail one and a GCC High one. When you open these, then under the attachments area is where you want to upload that CRM or SRM that was provided by that external service provider. You'd want to see that right here. Okay. That is going to tell you what controls that external service provider is responsible for implementing and maintaining, and it's going to tell you what controls you're responsible for. So whatever controls are listed as they are responsible for, that's going to be referred to as inheritance. And you would want to make sure that in your controls here, you mark them as inherited or partially inherited. So this one here, I said I had my Windows boxes were being managed by an external service provider, and I had an application that was managed by. So my inheritance column should have some inheritance. I can't say it's fully inherited because my on-prem firewall is being managed by me. So it's not fully inherited. You'd mark it partially inherited. Then once you,
Oh, that's what that means.
this, yeah.
Yeah.
Inheritance.
Partially inherited. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
It's a
Yep.
lot of
we're inheriting some of that information from a vendor that's holding onto our shit. And we verified through them that they've given us a dug into
Microsoft.
Yeah.
Hey,
So,
Mark, just to let you know, I'm hearing your conversation.
Oh.
I love it, but I didn't know if you knew or not. But yep, that's what inheritance means. It, no, you're all good, all good. So, then this little box, this little triangle will show up. Okay, so now we're saying, hey, FutureFeed is telling me, hey, you just said there's an inheritance. Please tell me what shared responsibility is addressing that inheritance. So you'd click that little triangle and then find your inheritance. So I had Prevail inheritance and I had some Entra ID inheritance, close it out. Okay, so now I'm telling the assessor that for objective B, there's some level of inheritance, open the statement. Your statement should call out that inheritance and, yeah, I think I've covered that. Okay, but let me show you here how let me undo these real quick. Okay, and then I'm gonna scroll down real quick. I'm gonna make it so I can't add the inheritance so I can, because you'll probably run into this issue here. You see down here under my tools and services, I have Prevail and there's a CRM flag, Entra ID, a CRM flag. If I open those, let's say I do this one. Here's my CRM. Let me close that out, okay? And close it. So now I'll refresh the page. Okay, see my Entra ID, it no longer has that CRM flag. And so now when I go back up into my inheritance, I can't select Entra ID because I didn't, within that Entra ID item, I didn't mark it as shared responsibility. And so now I can't click it. So if you ever get in a situation where you can't click the thing you want to click, it's because within that inventory item, you have to open it up and then associate this tool with that CRM. Okay. And now once I do that, once it has that CRM flag here, I can select it in my inheritance area. Okay. Another thing is if you don't click on this, if you don't see it here, if you don't see something here that you want to select, that's because you haven't associated that tool down here under test. So I only have 4 items. If I wanted, let's say I needed my whatever, for whatever reason, I needed that in there. So now I'm gonna see it up here. There should be 5 things. There's my Cisco router. So if you don't see the technology listed here, it's because you haven't linked it down below. If you see it, but you can't click on it, it's because you haven't identified the shared responsibility within that inventory item. Okay, so just a couple things to troubleshoot if you can't click on things. We do have an article on this too. So up here under user settings, if you go to help center, I'm going to open up a new tab. You can search for some guidance here. If you ever get stuck on anything, this should be your first place to look. Do note that you do have to be signed in. And if you've never signed into our help center, you'll have to create an account. Okay. But once you get signed in, you'll have access to the whole suite of FutureFeed user how-to articles. And if you get stuck in FutureFeed, search there. If you don't find the answer, you can reach out to support@futurefeed.com or .co, sorry, support@futurefeed.co. Okay. So do make sure your inheritance matches your statement, and all of that should match what you have in production. Okay. Any questions? I'll pause here. Any questions?
Maybe this is probably simple, but why does it say negative 203 for the score?
So the way the NIST scoring works is the worst score you can get is, I think, negative 204 or 205. Please, anybody on the call, please correct me because it's been a while. I think it's negative 204 is the worst score you can get. And then the best score you can get is a positive 110. Now, no clue why they did the scoring system.
Yeah, that's
Way.
ridiculous.
Yeah, no clue.
Yeah, because it throws me off because it's 110 controls, right? You think, and then you see negative 110 and negative 150 and now negative 203 I see here. It's like, what? Oh,
Yeah. Watch when my score should improve. Let's say I mark these both met, meaning the see it just went up. And this is just a 1-pointer. So
they have a different weight. Yeah.
yeah, you got 1-pointers, 3-pointers, and 5-pointers. And then there's 1 or 2 that have 0 points. But yeah, there's each one has a different weight. And then as you mark things fully met in FutureFeed, it's going to adjust that score. Your goal is to have a positive 110. See, my score jumped. Okay. Your goal is to have a positive 110. Any other questions so far?
If you have to, let's say there's something that you have to accept the risk for business reasons,
Mm-hmm.
you still would fail that.
Yeah.
Fail that one.
Yeah. If it's not
So-
implemented, you would still mark it as failed. So that way your score is accurate. But do know that you can't accept any risk. You cannot, if you want to obtain a CMMC certificate, a level 2 CMMC certification, you have to get to a full 110. You can't mark anything as risk accepted because you won't pass and get that certificate for a level 2 certificate. If you're unable to implement a control and you mark it as not applicable, then you would reach out to the DoD CIO office and get approval to mark something as not applicable. That's the only case where you can have a control not implemented and still pass an assessment if the DoD CIO has authorized you as having that control marked not applicable.
And they're probably not going to do that.
I've actually never gone through that process, but you can find guidance on that. That's in the DFAR 7012. that's in the DFAR 7012 language that talks about not applicable. And if you want to mark something not applicable, you have to get DoD CIO authorization. And they have an email in there. So if you do have a question, I just email email them and ask them, what's the likelihood of being granted not applicable? All right. So under the controls, you have this area, which we just went through, the requirement satisfaction summary. This is where you're going to mark things met or not met. And if they're not met, you should have a POA&M item. If they're met, you should have a description on how they are met and some evidence. Okay. Then you have interview section, examine and test. So up here in the summary notes and in the objective statements here, a rule of thumb is if you mention a person, a role, or a team, they should be found down below in the interview section. If you mention a process or a procedure or a document, then that should be found down below under the examine section. And then if you mention any tools or technology in use or being used to help implement these controls, you should find that down below in the test section, okay? So that's interview, examine, and test. We use these words because that's how all external assessors are gonna, those are the three methods an external assessor is gonna use to test your implementation. First, for every control, they're gonna interview you. Even if you already have it really defined in your system security plan, they're still going to talk to you about the control because they want to see if the people responsible for implementing that control if what you say matches what you have in your system security plan or matches what you have in your policy. So they always use the interview method. For every control, they're going to talk to you about that control and ask you how it's implemented. And then the examine, this is where you're going to have your documentation or your evidence or your screenshots. Test, these are the tools. And sometimes they test the controls. They actually perform a test. For example, they probably wouldn't do this one, but for example, the one we're on, limiting unsuccessful logon attempts, like a test they could perform is, hey, create me a user account and I'm going to try to log in so many times to see if I get locked out after I reach that threshold. Okay, so they do like to perform tests for all the controls, but some of them you just can't perform tests for. So whatever you say up here, people, technology, documents, you should find them down below. Interview, examine, and test. For the interview, we're using the RACI model again. Do try to have at least one of these filled out. If you can, you don't have to have them all filled out, but do try to have at least the responsible filled out and if can, the accountable. So these are going to be the people who are going to be interviewed during an assessment, whether it's an internal assessment or an external assessment. These people are going to be interviewed. These are the people responsible for making sure these control requirements are implemented or maintained, or their implementation is maintained, okay? And examine, I think I covered this. Make sure you have all your documentation. This is all your evidence, your proof, and then your test. And then down below, if you're doing an internal assessment, we have the potential assessment considerations. These are just a couple questions where you can ask yourself or ask someone at your company to help you with evaluating that control if you're a little stuck on what to ask, what to look for. You can click on them, mark things yes or no, and provide some answers if you'd like. And then we have a place for you to upload evidence for this control. There's two places to upload evidence in FutureFeed. Right here is one of them. But if you upload evidence here, it's only ever going to be associated with that whatever security control you're working under. So I'm under 318. That evidence is only ever going to be found under 318. I do try to tell you to I recommend that you actually upload evidence to your inventory items. So I'll show you under documents here. Let me go to a procedure. Yeah, this is a good one. We'll do this HR offboarding procedure. So in all of the document items that you create and all of the tool items you create, they all have a very similar layout, and they all have this evidence area. So I would recommend housing your evidence that something is being done. So here we have a HR onboarding procedure. You're going to need to show evidence that that HR onboarding procedure is being followed and completed for all new employees in the environment. So you'll probably want a couple examples of some onboarding checklists. For example, I don't know if you have a checklist or not, but just for example purposes, let's say I had a checklist that my HR fills out for every employee that comes on board. And on that checklist, it says they must complete user training, and they have to read the acceptable use policy, and they have to get issued IT equipment and get their account set up, like whatever is on there. I would probably upload a couple examples of completed checklists right here. So I'm showing evidence to my assessor that this procedure is being followed, and here's evidence of a couple items that have been that my HR is doing what they're supposed to do. So do try to, when you're uploading evidence into FutureFeed, try to associate it with whatever is making you generate that evidence. Okay. For example, if I had a risk assessment procedure document, I would upload my completed risk assessment report to that risk assessment procedure item. If I had a monthly change management board process, I would upload evidence that we're meeting monthly for change management to that change management procedure ticket. Am I making sense? I would always associate the evidence with the actual document that's making you produce that evidence. So that way, for example, this HR onboarding item here, I'll show you why. So how am I looking on time? Okay, I'm good. So this HR onboarding, let's say that onboarding process, people need to complete training. Okay, so I'm going to link it to my training requirements, because when new users come on board, they complete training right away, as well as when they come on board, they have to get screened. They have to do that background screening. Okay, so I connected that. What else did I say? That I make them sign the AUP, my acceptable use policy, that is educating my users on how they are supposed to handle CUI. Okay, so I might have some statements in that AUP that relate to media protection. Okay, so now I've just connected my HR onboarding procedures to these 6 controls. Okay, and evidence that this procedure is being followed is going to be found here. And so that evidence will be able to be found under all 6 of these controls. Whereas if I uploaded it directly under the control, I'd have to upload it 6 times. Does that make sense? Anybody
Yes.
making, okay, check. Okay. All right. So we do have a place for you to upload evidence under each control, but it's better housed elsewhere. So you don't have to upload it multiple times. So that's the assess page. You'd want to go through all the controls and do exactly what we went over. After you've gotten to this point now, you should have a bunch of POA&M items. Anything that you marked not met will have POA&M items. I don't know if I covered this or not, but when you mark things not met in FutureFeed, it's going to create that first POA&M entry for you. So here I got, right here, there's a plus sign. If I mark this not met, it's going to make it 1 because it just created for me a POA&M entry for this failed objective. And you're going to want to make a point to then open up that POA&M item and modify this POA&M description. It will come pre-populated because we've developed some POA&M narrative for you to use, but it's just intended to help you write that POA&M item, and you should be modifying it to fit your environment or why you failed. Describe why you failed and what needs to be done. So once you get past the assessment, you should have a bunch of POA&M items because you created POA&M items for all your not mets, and then you would have created POA&M items for all your documents that are still in draft and working. Note here under documents, you have an active document. So these are all my approved documents that are established. And then down here are pending documents. So these are all the documents that I have in draft and we're working on. If I add a document right here, as soon as I add a document, then it just created a POA&M entry for that test document. Same thing with tools. You have active tools and then pending or planned. These are things that we're going to be deploying in production. So I'm going to jump to the POA&M area. Like I said, you will have some POA&M, unless you're 100% compliant already, then congratulations, you just maintain that compliance throughout the years. But here is a listing of all my POA&M items that got created. And now you're going to want to start working on getting those assigned to the right people, communicating the required activity to those people, and tracking that progress. This first page under Project Builder, pending and in progress, these are a listing of all POA&M items. Over here are all the projects I've created. So we've implemented this Project Builder where instead of working on and having to manage, 100 different POA&M entries, you would group items together, put them in different projects, and assign that whole project to someone. For example, if you have a system administrator, you would give them all of the technical controls that need to be implemented in one project. If you have a Linux system administrator, you'd give them all the technical items that need to be implemented on your Linux boxes. If you have a facility security officer, you'd group all of the physical security non-compliance and assign it to that person. So to show you how that works, you just click on the ones you want to group, right? Let's actually make this a real kind of situation. I have I need a software inventory list, and I need a network diagram put together. What else? Here we go. Here's one for multi-factor authentication. Okay, so those are all 3 technical. My IT team is going to implement MFA, and I need them to develop me a network diagram and put together some inventory lists. So I select them, click add to project. I can add them to existing projects here, which I already have one for the IT team. So I just click it and hit add to project, or you can name it whatever and create a new project. Okay. So filtering over here under proposed projects, if there's a plus sign, that means that item is not part of a project. and you might want to create one. But then once you create projects, now you just have to work on, instead of tracking 100 different items, maybe you're going to just track 20 different projects. So a little less work as far as checking in on things and making sure people are working on the items and getting status updates. So take a look at your projects. I just created that one for, what did I call it? System admin work. You'd open up the project, assign impact, effort, cost, description, start due dates. I would get it assigned to my system administrator, make sure that they're getting that notification in FutureFeed that they have new items they need to work on. Some cases, depending on your company structure, you may need to meet with that compliance manager or meet with that team and get that project accepted, or maybe it needs to be put on hold longer. So that's tracking here. If I scroll way down, then these are the items that I added to this project. So now I would just need to check in on the status of this one project instead of one item at a time, which when you start work, if you're just implementing these requirements, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of line items that you would have to update and make sure someone's working on it. So definitely put things in projects. It makes your life easier. Now under deliverables, I'm going to just jump to this cyber readiness presentation where you can create presentations and reports directly out of FutureFeed. So first you click on setup, fill out your name, the summary. Then over here under cyber readiness, you get to select what you want to see in that report or presentation. Let's say I want to meet with that system administrator, and let them know that you just created a project. So you just navigate down to the projects, find the one that I just created, system administrator work. Maybe I also want to show him my current SPRS, my NIST score or SPRS score. Okay. And now I hit play, and it's going to create for me a presentation. It's only going to be as accurate as the information you have in FutureFeed. So here's my current assessment progress, details. Here's my overall compliance. Here's my current score. And then here's that project that I would want to meet with them. Scroll down. I didn't fill out any of this information, so it's all blank, but these are all fields in that project area. And then scroll way down. Here's the 3 items that I need them to work on. Okay. You can download this and it will look more like a report. Right now it looks more like a presentation. So you can present directly from FutureFeed or send reports to, download reports and send them out. Under the deliverables area, you also have an area where you can export your POA&M. So you can export a complete listing of POA&M items here under POA&M actions, or you can export a listing of your POA&M projects if you need to. Here's also where you're going to generate your SSP. You're going to export your SSP. Your SSP has been being updated. Every time you make an update in FutureFeed anywhere, it's updating your SSP in the background. So whenever you need to share that system security plan externally, you'd do so here under SSP report, download. It's also where, let's say I just downloaded this SSP. If I click on it, I can mark it approved or not. If I downloaded it and reviewed it and got it approved by someone, I can just mark it approved. I can make some notes, maybe track the version notes, approve date. Okay. So just click this download button. It will create for you a Word version of your SSP. If you need to submit your score in the PIEE system or SPRS system, whenever you submit a NIST score in the SPRS system, you should always have or archive or make a version of your system security plan that aligns with that SPRS score. So if you ever get audited and someone says, hey, you just submitted, or, on this date, you said your score was a -90. Why did you say that? Well, if you do this SPRS submission, what happens is it's going to take a snapshot of your system security plan. So essentially, it's generating a system security plan and then archiving it down here. Let me go to a different package that this has been done before. So down here, it saves it down here. So now I have a version of that system security plan that matches the score I entered in SPRS. So that's if you ever get audited. This is going to help you determine quickly what your SPRS score is, what is the date, what's your POA&M date, your cage code, and it's going to automatically save that SSP version just for auditing purposes. Other exports, you can export all of the data you've put into FutureFeed and any of the files you've put into FutureFeed here. Okay? This is definitely where you would need to do this. When you go into that C3PAO assessment, the very first thing they're going to want is they're going to say, okay, give me your system security plan and all of your evidence. So you're going to want to generate a file, export, and send that over to that C3PAO along with your SSP report. The only thing I passed is this SSP area. This is a browser view of your system security plan. So instead of generating an SSP report, which is going to download a Word document, and then reviewing that SSP in the Word document and finding all of the issues and logging back into FutureFeed and having to locate that area and make that update, you would want to conduct your official review of your system security plan in this browser view, in here. So that way, as you're going through the different sections of your SSP, which are all right here, if you see that there's an issue, okay, let's say my system details is wrong, I just click on this pencil and it's going to bring me back to that section of FutureFeed where that data is being pulled and you can make those updates, okay? So review your SSP here so you can quickly jump back to that other area and make any updates you need to. You can track your review because right now it says it's not reviewed. So let's say I reviewed this, everything looks good. I hit it, I click, I said it's reviewed. It does create a history of when you mark things reviewed and not reviewed. Before you go into any like official SSP review, you might want to reset all the flags. So to do that, you just click on this little setting icon, reset all those review flags. Now it's going to mark everything not reviewed and as shown here, it's now no longer not reviewed. So then you would re-review your SSP, mark it reviewed, and you'd want all of those marked, all your sections of your system security plan marked reviewed prior to going into any of your assessments. Okay. And I've ran out of time, but I will open up the floor to any questions. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, well, that really concludes the training of FutureFeed. There's some things that we didn't cover, little tips and tricks. I would say refer to the getting started guides, okay? Every page now has these built-in user guides and it talks about what you need to do on that page. It gives you guidance on how to fill out that page. And then I talk a little bit about tips and tricks. And I give a little guidance on compliance implications. So how is that, that data that you're capturing in that area, how is it helping you meet the security requirements? And then for the assessor is how, if you are going through an external assessment, what is the assessor going to be, how are they going to be reviewing this information, or how they're going to be using this information during an assessment, okay? Yep, you're welcome. You're all welcome. Okay, thank you all. Feel free to drop. I'm gonna just stick around until everyone leaves. And you know, I don't have another meeting, so if you have some more questions, I'm happy to help. You as well. Take care.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.